The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. According to the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Lands, it is estimated that BC farmers produce about 40% of all foods consumed in the province. That's a frightening statistic. It's one that demonstrates how much food is imported into the province to ensure you can enjoy a healthy number of calories. According to Professor Lenore Newman of the University of the Fraser Valley, we have the ability to provide food security in BC, coupled with the opportunity to create innovative ways of growing it. A key step forward is the just launched Sustainable Food Systems for Canada platform that will create a national agri-food innovations and entrepreneurship program. Lenore is one of the two national directors of the program, and she says the world is facing significant challenges with food security. We need to support agri-food entrepreneurs and encourage the development of technologies that will increase Canada's food production and resiliency. I invited Dr. Lenore Newman to join me for a conversation that matters about bolstering our food security and developing food production systems and equipment that meet domestic and international needs. Lenore, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I think that we constantly are being reminded of the fact that food is not as secure as we think it should be. And I'm going to jump to kind of the news that we're dealing with right now, the threat of potential tariffs on anything that crosses the border. This is a big complication when it comes to food.
It's very true. Complication is maybe a understated way to put it. It's an incredible threat, but it comes on kind of a chain of threats that I totally agree with what you're saying. Is we were in a period, especially the early 2000s, where globalization was expanding rapidly, food prices were dropping, and the idea that food would be critical to national security wasn't really on the radar because we could just get food from wherever we wanted. And about 2008, global trade peaked and started to drift downward. And we had the first set of Trump years, and then we had the pandemic, and now here we are. And suddenly food as an element of global security, national security, absolutely critical.
Well, let's talk about a couple of those complications. It's my understanding is that, yeah, we grow a lot of food here in British Columbia, but we don't do a lot of producing it. And so we have to send it to the United States. Well, does that mean that there's now suddenly going to be a tariff when we send it down there for it to be processed, only to turn around and then come back to us potentially with another tariff? What's that going to do to food prices?
This is possible, and it's a very unexpected situation, but we did have warning that our lack of processing was a challenge. And that really came about early 2000s, the regulations around allowing processing on the agricultural land reserve, which was an allowed use right from day one because it was set up as a food zone, a food production zone, field to table. And early 2000s, those regulations were changed slightly, and it made it very hard to build new large-scale processing. Wasn't the biggest crisis for quite a while because, like you say, we just sent food elsewhere and then brought it back. We could see a situation where food is tariffed at the border, and what's likely to happen is anyone who can is going to move south and produce in the US as well as process, because it's simply not viable to send food down and back if there's tariffs. The one part of the sector that's a little more protected is the supply managed side, because they do have processing, but even there we've seen challenges. And you may recall we had some challenges during the pandemic around a lack of diversity in processing, even in the supply managed industries. And so this is a critical element that has been flagged repeatedly over the last 10 years, and really hoping to see that fixed at some point.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. I want to expand or dig into a little bit more about what you were talking about, underutilized agricultural lands. What exactly are they? And then let's talk about the legislation shift that you said makes it now almost impossible to build processing plants on that land.
Yes, and without going too deeply into the weeds or seeds, I guess, it's the agricultural land reserve is sometimes framed by the government as being small. And the truth is, in the grand scheme of things, it's not, because BC is largely mountainous. And so the land that you can actually use for things, the valley bottoms, is heavily utilized by all users. And about 1/3 of the private parcels in BC, which is a lot of land, are in the ALR. And if you translate that into area, if we look at the Lower Mainland, which is the most coveted land in the country, half of the land in the Lower Mainland that you can actually use for something is in the ALR. Now, that would be fine, of course, if it was all farmed. And that was the intent, is you'd build this great farming industry, but somehow that piece got a little lost, and it's actually not utilized very intensely now. And that varies across the region. A place like Abbotsford, where I work, probably about 80% utilization, which is really good, to be honest.
And let's also recognize that it's remarkably fertile.
It is. It is. So we're producing a giant amount of food in the valley. But in some of the other regions, utilization's very low as 20%. And if you go out of the Lower Mainland, it drops even further. And so we have all this unused ALR. Now, the ALR was purposely made big at the founding to protect enough land that we were really good for ages. And part of the justification was processing, which is a key part of the industry, was placed in there as well. And so for most of the history of the ALR, if you wanted to build, say, a green bean plant, you could do that. You'd work with the government to site it and build it on the ALR, which was an advantage. We could draw people in because the land was a little cheaper.
Right.
In 2000, a little tweak was introduced that said you could still process in the ALR, but only if 50% of the food you were processing came from on-farm or from a co-op of farms, which is a bit of a wrinkle, but on-farm. And the problem with that, the government at the time didn't think through that farmers and processors are two different groups. Yes. And of course, an industry group would know that the people who want to process don't also want to farm. And unless we had like one really big farm, you would get a weird situation where everyone would have to build little processors, and the end result is processing started to leave the province. And so we lost most of our potato processing.
So is that because of lack of access to ALR land, or is it because they were then forced into industrial lands, which were experiencing their own squeeze?
Well, that's the other side of the coin. And it is interesting in that what happened in 1973 kind of set this all in motion, in that would have been fine if we had industrial land. But we actually have much less industrial land than almost any other city on Earth that is in a similar situation. And that's because at the time the ALR was founded, they also wanted to found an industrial land reserve, and it was never done. And so over the years, industrial has shifted toward mostly residential, and we only have about 4% of our land in industrial. So it's really expensive. And a food processor can't compete with, say, an Amazon depot. And so food processors find themselves in a weird situation that even if they have an old plant, on ALR, they can't easily build a new one because can't buy ALR. If they have an old plant on industrial, land is so expensive, usually the business decision that makes sense is they sell that land to another industrial user and they leave the province. And when they do that, we lose farms, because that's the piece no government has seemed to put together, if you don't have processing for an industry, the farms slowly dwindle off.
So, former Premier John Horgan seemed to recognize that this was an issue, and he tasked you and Peter Dillon to take a look at it and come up with a report. And in that report, you, of course, addressed this issue, but you also said, here are a whole host of other things that we can do. Where are we at with that report? I asked the question knowing the answer, but it's like...
It was a tremendous missed opportunity in many ways. That, to be honest, a lot of accidental things happened. And I will say, John Horgan was visionary in doing this, and he gave us a really clear mandate to think about how to build the kind of systems we see in places like the Netherlands and California. And we did our work, and we made a set of very clear recommendations, and he really liked those recommendations and declared they should be enacted. And then we immediately had the pandemic, which granted isn't anyone's fault. And then, sadly, Premier Horgan fell ill and had to leave office. Since then, the report has become a bit of a missed opportunity.
In British Columbia.
In British Columbia, it actually has been taken up in other provinces. And I think the thing, and I actually hate saying I told you so, but we had a chance 5 years ago to solve these problems. And if we had done so, we would have functioning processing plants now. And the example I often think of is we are really looking down the barrel with potential shortages of leafy greens because of what's happening in the US. And at the time, McCain wanted to come in and do potatoes and leafy greens in BC. They couldn't make it through the rules that we had suggested should be changed, and so they located it in Alberta, and they've cut the ribbon, they're operating. And it actually personally drives me nuts, because I go into a store in the Fraser Valley, I see those greens, and I know they could have been local, and instead they're coming in from Alberta. And it was a terrible missed opportunity. And to be honest, once the government changed, it was a little less... It's hard to say why the action was so slow. And we did get the one big win in that we got the change to controlled environment agriculture to allow it on the ALR. That has been a win. We now have a number of companies such as Avery and Up Vertical operating in the space. Even that was a fight. The Ministry of Agriculture was very hesitant of that. They felt it was going to open the floodgates to paving the ALR. And of course it didn't. And instead we have a little bit of lettuce. But we could have had so much more stew.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Well, you are a never say die kind of person, and so you keep pushing forward and you find new ways to do it. So this new initiative that's being led by you and Evan Fraser from the University of Guelph, tell us a little bit more about it and what the potential upside is to British Columbian food supply, but also then in food production innovation and beyond.
Yes, and it's interesting because it does follow, in a way, directly out of the task force, in that as part of the task force, we went to the Netherlands and we went to Guelph and we toured around and we looked at best cases where this was being done right. And certainly what we found is in some places, government, academy, and industry were working really tightly together to advance agricultural technology that would allow much more intensive food production. And we also interviewed Evan at that time, and we kept that conversation going. And we were all sitting together having coffee, and we're like, well, why can't we be like the Netherlands? That's what John Horgan wanted. And we're like, why don't we have a national approach to agricultural technology? We have all these little islands of really amazing stuff. let's network them together. And then, as you say, it became a never say die, in that Evan and I, at first, we pursued a first round of federal funding, and that didn't go anywhere, but we're stubborn. And then we did work with the proponents of the Abbotsford Tech District with the idea we could build that out into a national network, but then that didn't go anywhere. But we're still stubborn, and we picked Gavin Dew up along the way to be stubborn with us. And when the opportunity came to capture this money that was coming from ICID into NSERC to fund entrepreneurship, which is where we felt the hole was, we're like, okay, we're going to try once more. We're third time lucky, and this time it worked.
So what are the elements of the program that are essential when we start looking at the development of innovative food production systems?
Yes, this project focuses on a premise that what we felt was missing in Canada. We knew that there was so much money going into research in Canada. We're actually in about the top 6 in agricultural research. And yet, at the other end of the chain, we weren't producing the same numbers of, IP, patents, companies with minimum viable products, new innovations. Like, there was a gap. And we sort of knew where the gap was because we also have a pretty good incubator accelerator landscape. I mean, places like Creative Destruction Labs thrive. And I mean, here in BC, we've also got BC Chi and that network. So we figured, well, there's a little hole at the start where people have a great idea and they need a home, as it were, to take that idea to a point where they're ready to go talk to a venture capitalist or to an incubator accelerator. So the network is designed to do that. Number one, it will provide training from universities for entrepreneurship in agricultural technology, but in a new way, through what we call micro-credentials, like they're little bits. Because what we realized is a founder trying to get a company going doesn't want to take a full MBA or, a 4-year degree, because they don't have time, but they do need these little bits. So we'll be doing micro-credentials right across the country. Wow. Number 2, we'll be providing direct mentorship, connecting successful business leaders with people who need helping hand mentorship, helping them with government hoops, which in Canada, as we know, is a thing. And Guelph will actually have a concierge program, which you may remember, that's another thing that didn't ever quite get off the ground for us here, where they can give a call and say, hey, I'm trying to do something in Manitoba. Who do I need to talk to? Lastly, networking. Because we realized each province, the ag technology ecosystem, with possible exceptions of, say, Ontario and Alberta, they're pretty small compared to, say, a California or the Netherlands. But if you put them all together, then they're big. And so we networked together about 20 universities and industry groups, including CFIN and Bioenterprise and all the players, and said, hey, we're just going to come together and we're all going to get in rooms and talk about how we can work together. And the network includes 4 major nodes. The one at the University of the Fraser Valley for innovation, the one at Guelph, which is like the symphony conductor that keeps the band together, and the one in the north, because they have very specific needs out of Yellowknife, and one in the east at Laval, where they have the Quebec Biozone and AgriZone initiatives to cover the east. And so we have good coverage, and Evan and I are co-leading this, and sky's the limit, I think. And our goal is, in 5 years from now, when this first funding package comes to an end, we want to have one of the largest agricultural technology networks on Earth, and we want to have moved the needle and maybe even get that percentage of food produced in province and in country up a little.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. What is the upside potential? Because I can hear somebody going, well, we've been growing food forever, even though that's not true. But don't we already know, like, all the things that we can do? Like what is the upside potential in innovation in the production of food?
It's a good question, and I think I have a kind of philosophical way of looking at it in that people sometimes say, oh, ag tech, that's all scary and new and strange. But the truth is, agriculture is one of the most technologically forward industries we have. And that for the last 10,000 years, literally, we've been inventing new agricultural techniques to keep ahead of expanding population. And we've always won that race, which is kind of amazing if you think about it. We've done things like figuring out fallow fields, figuring out how to breed plants, figuring out how to breed animals. And then you come forward and you've got the Green Revolution, chemical fertilizer, genetic alteration, creating new genomes. It's an arc, almost 10,000 years of continued activity. This is basically continuing that path with one small wrinkle, that we just lived through a very exceptional 60 years or so. Basically, after World War II, we suddenly had this brief period where everyone's like, well, we'll just grow our food globally and move it all around and everything's peaceful. Especially get toward the end of the last century. The world's really peaceful. We're moving stuff around and it's all great. The climate was pretty stable. Now here we are with deteriorating climate, which is one thing that technology can address. And we see technology as even any field crop that, even unirrigated field crops, people are putting out drones and sensors and looking at better plant genomics, partly because they need to survive drought. They need to survive changing conditions. So that's number one. Number two is a deteriorating global situation politically for whatever reason. And, it's outside my wheelhouse to say why this is happening, but global trade is falling apart. We're seeing protectionism. We're seeing wars in regions that produce key inputs into the ag system. And Canada is an agricultural superpower. Suddenly that's much more important than it's ever been before. And that race, that 10,000-year-old race continues, but it's like we got to the next level of the video game and everything's a little harder. So to me, that's the driver, is we have to innovate really fast right now to stay ahead of all the changes and make sure we have food at a reasonable price.
So I only got a couple seconds left here, but the one last element and is that I remember you saying, we can do all this to produce the food, create innovative ways of doing it, and in doing so, those innovations become exportable products and services, which are of great benefit to us economically.
Yes, and I think that was what really inspired John Horgan all those years ago, was the Netherlands exports technology all over the world. They're very smug about it. They're very good at it, rightly so. And why can't that be us?
Why can't it be us? Lenore Newman, thank you for your time today and giving us a glimpse into this, the need and what you've been doing to addressing it in a I'm never going to give up manner. Thank you very much.